From Sandals Church, this is The Debrief with Pastor Matt Brown, a place for real questions and conversations from Christians trying to figure it out in the real world. So in October of 2017, the hashtag #MeToo began trending on social media sites as women and men began sharing their stories of sexual harassment, abuse, and assault. And man, as that hashtag has grown and continued to go viral, it's been an incredible catalyst for conversations about things that are normally not discussed and usually kept secret, especially in the church. Recently, Pastor Matt Brown invited his wife, Tammy Brown, and one of our worship leaders, Christina Crowley, to join him on stage at Sandals Church for a real conversation, inviting these women to share their stories and talk about God's heart for the abused. So today on The Debrief, we're going to be debriefing that conversation as well as answering your questions about sexual abuse. So, as you can guess, this is not an episode that is going to be super friendly for children. I want to encourage you to use discretion, maybe hit pause, especially if you've not yet seen or heard the message from Pastor Matt with Tammy and Christina. I want to encourage you to just actually hit pause right now. Go to www.debrief.show/97. Follow the link so you can watch or listen to that sermon with Pastor Matt, Tammy, and Christina before you jump back and join us in for this conversation. In just a moment, those three are going to sit down with Stephanie Schaefer as she leads them through this conversation and answers your questions. But before we do that, we want to give you an opportunity to hear Christina Crowley as she shares her story with you.
I was 7 years old the first time I heard the three little words, "Don't tell anyone." Little did I know those words would become the bricks I would use to build my walls of self-protection. I was excited for the day. Our neighbor across the street invited me and some of my other little friends over to help him do work in his backyard. Because I was only 7, he asked permission from my parents. He was going to pay each of us $10 for a couple hours of work. I couldn't help but think of all the candy I could buy with that. We had fun together, laying stones and planting flowers. And when our time of working came to a close, the man walked all of us out of his backyard gate to go home. As I was getting ready to walk through the gate, he closed it and said he wanted to thank me differently. He said that I was special and he liked me best out of all the girls. Then he began to kiss me. Immediately, my stomach felt sick. He led me into his garage where he continued to molest me. I remember every detail of those scary moments, what he said and did to me. It was eerily dark. I could hear the laughter of my friends playing right outside the garage door, but I couldn't talk or scream or anything. I was just frozen. One of the worst parts was when the man's mother walked into the garage and saw me there with him. She just turned around, closed the door, and went back into the house. Why didn't she rescue me? At some point, I believe God gave me the courage to speak, saying something like, "If my mom looks out the window and sees my friends playing, she'll wonder where I am." Those feeble words must have made sense because he let me go, but not before firmly whispering in my ear, "Don't tell anyone." Sadly, that was the first of many times my innocence would be stolen through sexual abuse from people I believed to be trustworthy. The abuse done to me would lead to abuse that I would do to myself in the years that followed. Promiscuous behavior and dangerous relationships, a deep need for approval by boyfriends and others, a twisted view of my worth, and a feeling of being overlooked led me to struggle with an eating disorder and a suicide attempt. I've done some really bad things that have filled me with deep guilt and embarrassment. Naturally, I didn't tell anyone. Years of pretending that I was okay eventually became my primary way of functioning. No one ever knew the depths of my shame I carried. I developed the skills of being the one in control, strong and self-reliant. I felt I didn't need anyone anyway, and my walls of self-protection grew thicker and higher. Fortunately, in the middle of this chaos, I grew up with 2 amazing parents who planted seeds of God's love deep within me. We went to church and volunteered there, but I didn't talk to my parents about my struggles, and I definitely didn't talk to God. It didn't matter what anyone else said. Ugliness is what I saw every time I looked in a mirror. I was never good enough. I felt that maybe if I volunteered more or did more and tried harder to forget the past, that I could undo some of the mess that I'd made with my life. I had to fix my own mistakes. Though God's perfect grace was not even a thought, it was the only medicine my young, broken heart needed. At the height of my abuse, my parents bought me my first guitar. I had no idea how much that guitar would be a lifeline of truth, comfort, and healing for me. I memorized church songs about who God was and how much He truly loved me, all of me. Music was the only place that helped me forget the grossness inside. And for the first time since that fateful day at the age of 7, I felt safe when I sang, even safe with God. Many years passed, and with my guitar in hand, I began leading worship within the church. I wrote songs that would help me express my heart about my painful past and my hope for a better future. Jesus was my ultimate rescuer, and I loved to sing about it. I didn't have to keep Him on the outside anymore. I learned to trust and let Him inside my walls. I found deeper places of healing as I grew to understand that Jesus saw my filth, and He still loved me. Yet even with this newfound hope, part of my wall of self-protection stayed intact. I couldn't let others see the real me, especially others in the church. People would look at me differently if they knew what was done to me, and worse yet, what I had done to myself. They wouldn't want someone with my past leading them in worship. However, God was preparing to teach me that it's impossible to fully let Him in without letting others in too. I was at the lowest point in my adult life when I found Sandals Church. I was coming out of a very painful church experience that had brought back to my mind my sexually abusive past. And for the first 9 months we were at Sandals, my husband and I basically just hid in the back and we didn't talk to anyone. I started to hear over and over about this vision to be real with self, God, and others. As Pastor Matt explained and modeled what that meant, I realized I had no clue how to make that a practice in my own life. Being real was the antithesis of every way I had ever lived. My other church experiences, especially in a position of leadership, never encourage authenticity in any form. Fake it till you make it, and don't talk about the bad stuff, were 2 rules that influenced my life. And because of these opposing spectrums, I felt conflicted. One morning at church, I recalled a book that I'd read years earlier. It claimed that God wants to use our greatest pains and turns them into our greatest ministry. I thought there was no way that would be part of my story. My greatest pain was my sexual abuse, and I didn't talk about that. But God began to move in my heart. And as I looked over the hundreds of people at Sandals Church, I began to wonder how many other men and women had stories like mine. How many other people walked in the door every week feeling desperate to be known and deeply loved, but at the same time feeling that if people really knew their junk, they'd be rejected. How many others wish that the church would be the one place on earth where they didn't have to hide behind their walls. God's heart for the hurting and the broken grew inside of me, and I felt God say, I can handle their truth, and so can this church. This is the place that I've led you to open your mouth and share your story and invite others to do the same. Healing and freedom is waiting. I wish I could say that I was immediately obedient, but after months of prayer and waiting for God to change His mind and pick someone else, I finally met with one of the pastors, and I told someone. I shared that I wanted to walk with people as they heal from their past of sexual abuse and the effects that stem from it. He was so helpful, and he just listened and championed for this next level of authenticity. I talked about my bad and ugly places, and I shared the hope that I'd found in Jesus. Learning to identify trustworthy people in situations like this one gave me the freedom to slowly open my heart again. And God showed me more of Himself through the healthy embrace of others at Sandals Church. Through being real, I found that I was worthy of love by God, others, and even myself. Being at Sandals Church has given me the courage to come out from behind my wall of self-protection and find sincere acceptance. And I'm learning that it's okay to need help from others. I don't always have to be the strong one. I'm learning to confess that I'm not a good Christian girl, and I never was, I never will be. I still battle some of the demons from my past. There are scars on my soul that are a reminder that I have been badly damaged. But by Jesus' wounds, I've been healed and made whole, and no one can ever take that away from me. And now when I play music and lead worship for our church, it's from a place of knowing I've been rescued, not from a long list of bad experiences, but from a lifetime of condemnation. And instead of remaining quiet, I want to use my voice to tell everyone that I know God sees and loves me with an unconditional love despite what I've done. It's a love that calls to each of us, come out from your hiding. Interestingly, all this time I thought that I was the one in control of tearing down the walls I built to let God and others in. But it was never my own efforts, not even in my healing. God was always the one at work. And now instead of listening to the voice that says, don't tell anyone, I want to be the voice that tells everyone, God can heal you and make you new. You don't have to be good on your own. The words in this passage from the Bible describe what God in all of his gentle love and goodness did as he reached in and rescued me. I waited patiently for the Lord to help me, and he turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on solid ground and steadied me as I walked along. He has given me a new song to sing, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see what he has done and be astounded. They will put their trust in the Lord. Psalm 40, verse 1 through 3.
Well, Tammy, Christina, thank you so much for joining us on the debrief today. Pastor Matt, thank you so much for really leading out on an incredible conversation this weekend for our church. I know it was incredibly impactful for so many people. We got so many questions in over the course of the weekend. The ones we have here are really just representatives of, I would say, probably twice as many questions as we were able to get on the show. So this weekend service was really part of a larger conversation that's happening in our nation around the topic of sexual abuse, assault, and harassment. And as followers of Jesus, what would you say our response to the Me Too movement should be, just starting off?
I would just say just one of love and compassion and understanding. And, the church should be a safe place. The church should be the place where anyone can come to who's had something horrific happen to them. The tragedy is oftentimes the church is the actual place where the abuse has occurred. And so the church has really been behind the times in terms of dealing with this issue and coming alongside people, believing that people can commit such acts of horror and evil. I think that's been one of the real challenges in the church is identifying and understanding what God knows is that the depths of human hearts are evil. Jeremiah says, who can know the depths of the human heart and its evil? And so it's really interesting. The world says, follow your heart. God says, don't trust your heart, follow him. And so our desires can be incredibly wicked, and that wickedness can cause us as human beings to do horrible acts of injustice, violence, and sexual abuse to individuals who are powerless to prevent those who are stronger from taking out those acts upon them. So the church just needs to be a place of loving, kindness, understanding, and the verse really this week that we focused in on, that we're to be patient with those who've been wounded, we're to be encouraging with those who are timid, and that's, telling somebody that you've been sexually abused or sexually molested is probably one of the hardest things that you're going to ever have to say, especially if it's someone in your life that you love or care for. And so here's the good news out of a really, really bad, I think, conversation that we had to have this weekend is we had 110 people come forward for prayer. So think about that. 110 people said, man, I've been affected by this. I have been wounded in this area. And we had 25 people begin the process of actual soul care, saying, I'm going to begin to start my healing. And so our sermon, or our talk, I guess, with the three of us, was the first step that allowed 25 people, think about that, to take the step and to begin to change their story. And so we talked about this weekend that, sexual abuse is a chapter in your story, but it's not the end of your story. And so it's a horrific chapter. It's an ugly chapter. It's an awful chapter, but God wants to rewrite your life story. And it doesn't mean that event didn't happen, or multiple events in some people's cases, but that God can do something amazing in your life. Your life is not over. And that's the hope that we want to give and bring to people who've suffered. And so many people, men and women at our church, came up to me. I was actually really surprised. Older people, like in their 70s and 80s. So you think about the burdens that you guys have had to overcome in your age demographic. Think about those in their 50s, 60s, 70s. I had one lady in her 80s, and she said, I told my parents and they didn't believe me. So just, man, my heart just breaks, for those people who weren't believed, and parents didn't know what to do or didn't believe them, or the authorities didn't know what to do or what to believe them. And our whole country is growing in terms of how to deal with this evil. It's a real evil. It's a real problem. It doesn't seem to be going away, no matter how many laws we pass or how we try to protect children. It's a real evil. It's a present danger in the lives of children today. And so I just was really grateful, super proud of Christina and Tammy for stepping out there and just being real about their story. And here's the thing, that's what I told Tammy on Sunday night after, we had done this 4 times. I just said, I'm so proud of you because you gave permission to people that can now come forward and say, this is my story, this is what happened to me. And I think the power in what Christina and Tammy did is they're both successful, they're both incredible women. They've done amazing things with their life in spite of these horrific events that happened. And I'm just super, super grateful. And just, they're both such a picture of how God can make all things new and all things different in your life. And so I just love them both very much. And like I said, I've been married to Tammy 22 years. Christina and I have been in each other's life for 12 years. And, Christina and I actually met at the beginning point, really, of your healing in your adult life. And I'll never forget, I think we met in my office and you shared to me what happened. And at first I was really intimidated. And we talked through that and I wasn't sure what to do with that. But you were gracious and loving to me in your healing process. And I feel like God really grew me. And that also allowed me to relate to my wife in a better way, because none of us know what to do with this. We're so ill-equipped. Both the victim and those who love the victim are ill-equipped on how to handle this situation. And so that's why we need to have this conversation. So I just love our church, that we're willing to do hard things. We're willing to have real conversations. And, Sounds Church is, one of the greatest churches on earth. And I just love our people that are just like, look, and I'm thankful to, all of those of you who tithe and give. And I know that you could put your money in so many other places, but you invest it in the kingdom of God at Sandals Church. And we're able to think about that, come alongside, these 110 people who are hurting. Your tithes, your offerings are supporting that. 25 people were immediately worked into care. And just for those of you guys who don't know, it's our policy that when someone reaches out to Soul Care, they're contacted within 24 hours. If we don't initially get in contact with them, they're contacted 7 times in the first week. So we call, we text, because sometimes people reach out and then maybe they're not ready, and that's okay. But we do our best that if you're ready, to let you know we're ready, and we want to come alongside you. And we have so many people who are trained, who love you and care about you. So
yeah, so I'd actually love to kick off the conversation with a question from Serena that kind of goes down that path. So she says, this weekend was an eye-opener for many people who were sitting in your audience. As I looked around the room after you announced what the message was going to be, the husband in front of me slowly put his arm around his wife. I could tell it was for her story and making her feel safe, and I had to keep it together. I too have been molested as a child and never healed from it, and I come to church alone. I felt that God was saying it's time to listen and heal yourself. I saw these 2 beautiful women on stage so open to a subject that is so taboo, and I want to say thank you for opening this up. Now, my question is, where can people like me get help to heal? I imagine there were more than 25 people needing to get started. What's the next step for people who are looking to get healing from this?
Yeah, the first thing is I think exactly right. She said it's time for me to start healing. So I think it always starts with a decision. I'm going to change my life. I'm going to take hold of this situation and begin the process. And so the next step would be to reach out to Soul Care immediately. And so Soul Care is, people who are trained, who can come alongside you. And not only that, but our church has specifically identified Christian counselors, Christian centers where your faith and your healing can come together under a professional who's trained. And so these are vetted people that we know, love, and trust, and we can put you in contact with them. Because a lot of people don't know where to go and they don't know who to reach out to. And so our church has done kind of the legwork on that to connect you with somebody that can help you specifically in that process. But again, a lot of people aren't trained to deal with that. And so these people at our church are trained. They want to hear your story. They want to come alongside you. And, Tammy talked about being a receiver of real, I'm going to call you babe. She's my wife. But would you just talk about like how important it is that the first time you share that somebody's a good listener?
That role is so important in listening. I said it this weekend, but I'll say it again, that for the person who's been wounded or abused to actually put that out in words is actually such a big step. Christina would agree, because what they're doing is everything inside them says, if anybody knew.
Right.
They will reject me. They'll look at me different. They'll think about me different. They won't want to engage with me the same way. And so there's just so much power in that first initial conversation. So for the listener, and I love that you shared that we have this, because we have so many soul care guides that we've trained on how to do this well. So that next step would come in, reach out to a guide, and they might not be your long-term counselor, but they can be a friend to walk through with you from the church that cares about you, that's trained on how to be a good listener. But for everybody else, and for this question specifically, I think of how do I get this help? To really begin praying through and thinking about who in your life do you already have that you know that is a safe person. That might be a close friend, that might be a family member. Like, who is that person to start initial conversation of, this happened to me, I know that I need to begin to fight for my own healing. And I think she said in there, and maybe I'm caught on the wording, but I need to start healing myself. And one of the big things that we talked about this weekend was that as people who've experienced this, we don't just need healing, we need the healer. However, nobody, and you and I experience this, like, you can't heal. I have to want it for myself. And I think that for every person that's gone through something like this, like, people can want healing for you so badly, but they can't do it for you. And so Christina and I, we've had to say, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to work through this, to fight through the lies, to seek out the truth, to get the help that I need. We have to be vigilant about our own emotional, spiritual, relational growth and health. And so I think that's the first step, is finding someone in your actual life and then reaching out to the church and let the church be a safe place for you to find that next step for you. But at the end of it all, you are your own best person in that way, to advocate on behalf of yourself when other people didn't. And I think healing will come in. You'll be surprised to find the people that actually God places then to be advocates on your behalf as you begin to do that.
Yeah. And so if you are someone at Sandals Church who is wanting to maybe take that step and get some connection with us, go ahead and reach out to us at move.sc/help. Maybe you didn't get a chance to come forward this weekend, or you missed the message. We would love to get you connected with that. So go to move.sc/help. That link will also be in our show notes for this episode at debrief.show/97. We would love to help you start those conversations when you're ready to reach out to someone here at Sandals Church. We would love to have a chance to talk to you.
Yeah. And let me just say, some people reaching out online is easier than a phone call. So one of the things that I learned from our soul care team leader was that's actually been very, very helpful for people, because you can start your story, press pause, and come back to it when you're ready. And so whenever you're ready to press send, we're ready to read it. And sometimes that's very, very helpful, and it's a much less threatening way to reach out. So just know that people read that stuff, we pray over it, and we care about you. Your story matters to God, and it matters to us. And so just know, we spend a great deal of time, care, and energy focusing on your story so that we can get you to a place where God can work a miracle and bring healing in your life.
Yeah.
I want to speak to the person who maybe has already done this in the past. Maybe they have reached out and they did tell somebody and it wasn't handled well. And so now the fear is nobody's going to handle it well. And there's just that lie that I've just got to hold it. And I just want to encourage that person, try again. As Tammy, you talked about being your own advocate, and we talked this weekend about the empowerment of owning your own story, not letting it own you. And so I would just encourage that person who maybe already tried, don't let somebody else's stupidity or even ignorance on how to handle something well keep you frozen in fear and isolation. So just please, that's just, I think our heartbeat for this whole topic is just share your story.
Just with what Christina just shared is, so I reached out, it didn't work. And the meaning that a lot of people derive is, so therefore no reaching out will work, no one will help, I'm all alone. So those are three false meanings. And so we have to be very, very careful that we don't attach meanings to the experience. So we may have reached out to the wrong person, or the person wasn't ready, or, there's all kinds of things that could have happened, but you matter to God, you matter to people. There are good people out there, and there are people that are willing to walk along with you in that situation. Not every counselor is a great counselor. And that's no slam on counselors. It's in every profession, not every pastor, not every doctor, not every police officer, lawyer, mom, dad. Not everybody is equal in terms of their ability to care, listen, and love. So make sure that you don't throw away healing because you had a bad encounter or a bad experience. And so, and that's just true in life. Don't stop because you had a bad experience or it didn't go the way you thought it should, because there are people, and sometimes we have to reach out 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 times, and then we find that counselor, that person, that's going to come alongside and help us. And man, that's when the miracle happens. So,
Absolutely. So this next question comes in as an anonymous sender who said, I opened up the door to sexual sin at a young age. Because of that, I've experienced sexual abuse, which I believe is my fault for partaking in this sin to begin with. Last year, I was raped and became pregnant, and I turned to abortion. All of this was before my relationship with God. And now that I've accepted Christ, I find it so hard to forgive myself for that abortion. And even though I know Jesus is able to make me clean, I find myself constantly dwelling in that time of sin. How can I get past this and accept myself the way that Christ has accepted me?
Yeah, I would just say that's a huge, huge process. And all of us struggle with the reality of God's forgiveness and grace. That's just one of the things, So Paul says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And so here's one of the ways that I would say that it's evident that God's at work in your life is because you still carry the weight of a decision that took a child's life. And so I would say that's evidence that God's at work in your life because it's the Holy Spirit saying that's not what you're supposed to do. So that's part of the truth. The second part of the truth is that God can forgive you and cleanse you from even that. And so we need to trust God in that process and know that, again, God can make all things new. And so that child is in his hands and we have to trust him with that. And don't let the enemy continue to speak lies to you, because what the enemy is going to say is you're not forgiven. You can't start over. There's nothing new. The enemy is going to hold you back. And Jesus says he's the father of lies. Everything that comes out of the devil's mouth is a lie. And so I think most of us have regret for sexual decisions that we've made in our past. And often, and if you're listening to me and you're a virgin, stay that way, trust God. That is the right way to go. There's so much harm and pain that you don't have to suffer if you just trust God in that. God's way is always the best way. And I think what she's saying is she experienced the reality of being involved in sexual sin that puts us in situations with people that we should not be with, because the kind of person that God wants you to be with, if you're a young woman or a young man, is the kind of person that's going to commit themselves to you, protect you, love you, and keep you safe. And so a lot of times sex is a place where we're used. And so there's a lot of people that want to use us. There's very, very few people that actually want to love us. And so that's what marriage is. Marriage is the place where we're not used for sex, but we're loved. And sex is an outpouring of the love that we experience with each other. And so just continue to trust God in that process. Your life's not over. God's going to continue to move you in that direction. And I would encourage you to get involved with soul care, walk with somebody to help you understand right thinking about what the Bible says, because you're a new Christian. And so what that means is you have a lot to learn about God. And a lot of what we need to learn about God is his forgiveness, his grace, and how we can experience that in our life. And just for me personally, even as a pastor, I would preach the gospel to people all the time. You can be forgiven. God's grace is powerful. And yet the person that I struggled forgiving the most was myself. And so I carried some sin that I had committed in college on me for 10 years, and it almost brought me to my end. And in my mid-30s, I had to go and deal with that. And I believe that I had given myself to the spirit of deception, the spirit of lies, who was lying to me that the gospel was for everybody else, but not from me because I knew better. And so I think those are the hardest sins to forgive ourselves of, is when we knew what was right and we chose to do wrong.
Well, the thing about that question that first stands out to me is that in the midst of kind of my decisions and my stuff, there was that, and I was raped last year, and we clearly don't know all the details surrounding that, but I would say to this person, first of all, like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I can't imagine what you're carrying and how just tangled up all of that is for you. But also to encourage you to make sure that you don't lump that in with everything else that's happened with you, that if you were indeed raped, that you do report that and deal with that if you haven't already, because that matters. The fact that happened to you matters, and it was wrong. And I just felt like that was kind of a thrown in the middle of that question, and that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I missed that. Sorry.
And so again, my heart just breaks for you going through that on top of what you're already carrying in terms of guilt and shame. But I do want you to know that no matter what you carried from your past in that, there's probably something to be pursued. And so, and again, if you need help pursuing that, we have people here that can help you untangle what that looks like and figure out those next steps. But I just don't want to ignore that was in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the gals that I prayed with this weekend was raped at a college party, and she reported it to the college, and the college did not report it to the police. And I encouraged her to go back and to re-report it and to go to the police because, and just again, here's why. And her concern is, she said, I don't want to ruin their lives. And I said, okay, I understand that that's noble, but they could do this to someone else. And so we need to make sure that we protect a future victim. And so, while I think that's noble not to want to destroy anybody's life, they did commit a crime, and crimes deserve punishment, and that's important. And so,
and that's one of the things I would say in this, in this whole movement of talking about Me Too, and I've been abused, and yet so much comes with that of choices that we make, is to always make the distinction between immorality and criminality, because that matters. Like, we may have made some choices, some immoral sexual choices, but there's a hard line between immorality and criminality. And I think rape clearly falls into the criminality case side of that. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are here local in the area, we want to let you know about a really great resource. Riverside Life Services here in Riverside offers a post-abortion recovery group for women who maybe have experienced this. If this is you who's sending this question, we would love to get you connected with them. They also have an incredible staff who would love to help any woman who may be considering or has already had an abortion. They're great ladies there. I know a lot of them personally, and you can reach them anytime by calling 951-784-2422 or emailing info@riversidelifeservices.org. We'll obviously throw all that information in our show notes on this episode. We would love to get you connected with those folks there. They would love to help you out, whether that's post-abortion or if you're considering one, whatever situation you may be in. There are people here in town who would love, love, love to help you. So kind of shifting now to a different side of sexual abuse. My husband, Tyler, actually is an abuse victim. He, as a young child, was actually abused by someone in the church that his family attended. And after that came out years later, and similar to your stories, it took years for him to work up the courage to actually say what happened to him. I think especially for men, that can be really hard. It's a lot different. And in sharing that, the people that he told basically brushed it on the rug. They kind of told everyone at the church there, but then nothing ever happened. They said, we'll take care of it here. You don't need to report it. It never got reported. Eventually his family went to the police, which nothing really came from that. But he now has struggled with, where he says, he's worked through a lot of therapy. He's gotten a lot of healing. But now he says that the core of his issues deal with anger and forgiveness really in two areas. One, the men who are in leadership at the church who kind of brushed everything under the rug and really ultimately kind of pushed his family out of that church and that community. And then he just wants to know, like, how does he go about forgiving those people? Those feelings of anger and unforgiveness still come up. And that's, I think, what he really struggles with right now. So what does forgiveness look like for people who basically said, it's not a big deal?
Yeah. So here's the sin of the church. The sin of the church is that when someone is victimized, the church goes into self-protection mode. and they circle the wagons to protect the church. And unfortunately, this is true in many institutions. And it's why it's so important that we remember, and we're going to talk about more Paul's definition of love in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 next week. I'm super excited about that, where we're going to talk about what it means to be a love warrior, to fight for love. And Paul talks about what love is, but Paul says, and the verse that we use this week, that love never rejoices in injustice, but celebrates when the truth wins out. And the tragedy there is that as dark, as bad, as difficult as something is what we want is the truth to come out. And unfortunately, at Sandals Church, we've had people who have done things to underage children that were horrific. We had people go to jail because of this issue. And my job as the shepherd of the church is to protect the victim. That's my job. That's my role. I'm the shepherd, and God's going to hold me accountable for that. And, I wish that, evil people would just wear a shirt that said I'm evil and I shouldn't be around kids, or people who, or I'm dangerous to women, but they don't wear those shirts. And oftentimes they're very crafty and they're very sneaky and they're prowling like a lion. And so, Tyler, I'm sorry, your church blew it. They sinned. They will be held accountable for that sin on the day of judgment unless they repent. And so repentance involves you coming back to you and asking for forgiveness and saying we were sorry and we blew it and we should have done something different. Are they going to do that? I don't know. That's what we would do at our church. That's what we do at Sandals. We make mistakes as leadership. We ask for forgiveness. We repent. We do that because we're not perfect. And so I'm just really, really sorry. And for you, what I would say is that anger, James says that human anger does not produce the righteousness of God. And so I think that it's important that you bring that anger to God and that you entrust him with that. And so because what it does is it gives evil a foothold in your life. And as a new husband and soon to be new dad, you need to be as free from anger as you can possibly be. And so what it is it's not saying what happened was okay or right. It's saying, God, I trust you to judge this. I trust you that your vengeance will be righteous and your vengeance will be just. And these people will not get away with this. And this is not right. And so the person who victimized you is going to stand before an almighty God. And listen to the words of Jesus. And I didn't say this on the weekend message, but Jesus says it would be better for you to tie a millstone around your neck and be thrown into the deepest ocean than to harm a little child. What Jesus is saying is suicide's a sin, and I'm not encouraging anyone to do that. But Jesus is saying that's better than hurting a child, because you're going to stand before an almighty God and not face a temporary death, but eternal judgment and death. And so just know that these people who did this to you will stand before Jesus, your Savior, your Lion, man, God Almighty, the one who threw Satan to the ground like a bolt of lightning. That is who these people are going to face. And just so you know, James, who also says human anger does not produce the righteousness of God, says that teachers will face a stricter judgment. Mm-hmm. So I will be held more accountable, and these people will be held more accountable. And that's why, as leaders, we can't fear, the truth getting out about something bad happening at our church. What we have to fear is the judgment of God. And so therefore we have to pursue truth and let it come out. And, one of our sister churches, Saddleback Church, which we love and care for so dearly, a couple months ago, the news came out that someone at their church in leadership had done something to a kid. What the news media didn't report is that it was Saddleback that turned them in. And I was so proud of that church. I was so proud that they were the ones that risked their reputation. They risked their standing. They did all of that to protect kids at their church. And I just thought, man, that's what we need. We can't stop predators from doing that. But what we can do is we can rise up, speak the truth, and let everybody know that at Sandals, people like that are not, predators are not safe. Victims are safe. And we're going to do whatever we can do to call them out and to do that. So my heart goes out to you, and I'm so sorry. Either of you guys want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to, first of all, I want to thank Tyler for his question. And just from a man's perspective, I know our heart was really for the men of our church too this weekend, that they wouldn't see this as a women's issue. I think sometimes women get a little bit more in the forefront that this has happened to them, but statistically we know that there's just so many men that this has happened to. So I just commend his courage and his question. I just wanted to speak to the forgiveness and the anger part too. I know for me and my process of healing, forgiveness was a tricky one because there were times where I felt like I had forgiven the person or persons, and then I would have a memory or a flashback or something would trigger it and it would kind of come to the surface again. And then I would be back in that place and then all the emotions would come up. And so I was confused about what does forgiveness look like when I feel attached to the memory again. And for me, it really was just the process of saying again, God, I choose to forgive that person. I bring them to you. I release myself from them. It's really this act of detaching from the person because I didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. And so anytime a memory would come or I'd get angry, it was the act and really the obedience of just, God, I forgive again. I forgive again. I forgive again. And so I think sometimes it gets confusing when we feel like forgiveness is a once and a done thing. I have found in my relationship with God that I often have to remind myself that this is something that I've already had victory from, and that there's no shame in feeling the feelings again. And I'm just so sorry that happened from a pastor's perspective, because that gets connected with your relationship with God. And as a person who also was wounded by a pastor, the importance of talking about your story and letting others in is there's redemption on the other side of that. I mean, Matt, we've talked about the healing I've had in my life because I was able to talk to you, a pastor who I was afraid of all authority for years because everyone who abused me was an authority figure. So I equated all people in authority as scary. And you helped to redeem and renew that so much. So there's life on the other side of that brokenness for sure.
Yeah, let me say two things, because a lot of you just can't believe that a person in authority or in power would abuse. And let me just say this: people that are drawn to power should run from power. Those are the pastors that I see that are the most dangerous. They're in love with power. Sexual sin and pornography is something that I struggle with, and so if I went to a strip club, right, I could not do that without sinning. There are some pastors who can't stand on stage and preach the gospel without sinning. The pulpit is actually their sin. The authority, the power, it drips from them, and it's dangerous. And that's why Jesus says, do not lead like the world does, because they lord it over them. That's the devil. That's how the devil rules. And so many people in power are not in power to serve. They're in power to be in power. And it's very dangerous, and it's dark, and it's evil. And so we need to understand that. I think what Christina said about forgiveness is so important. Another word to describe forgiveness, and she used it, is release. It's releasing. It's saying, God, I'm not gonna hold on to this anger. I'm gonna release this to you. Reconciliation is a deeper part of forgiveness that ultimately is what God wants. What we don't want is just to be forgiven of our sins. What we actually want with God is reconciliation. That's what we want. And so reconciliation involves true repentance. God, I am so sorry, and walking through that. And so that only occurs, reconciliation only occurs when the offender is truly broken and truly sorry and humbles themselves and says, man, I can't believe I did that. That was evil. That was, so we just need to really divide releasing and reconciliation. They both fall under this big word called forgiveness. But, forgiveness is releasing somebody over to God. I'm not going to carry the weight of having to judge you or worry about what's going to happen to you in the future, because I know God's got it. So God's in control. I don't have to worry about this. God's got it, and we entrust Him to that. So
yeah. So we actually got another question, and I know that this has been Tyler's experience too. This whole experience has made going to church really hard. It can even be challenging for Tyler now. And we got another question from someone who says, I know that maintaining my faith requires the help of community and church somewhere other than the church where this happened. But how can I go about trusting the institution that has caused me so much hurt?
Yeah. Don't trust the institution. Trust Jesus. I'm going to say this and just know that I love the church. I do. I believe the church is the hope of the world. The church is the bride of Christ. There's very few churches I would actually attend. I just think churches are dysfunctional, gross, weird. led poorly. And again, I don't want to speak disparagingly to Christ's bride because I'm rooting for the church and I'm praying for the church's success. There is so much unhealth. And, if you take a group of unhealthy people, I don't care what you call the organization, it's going to be unhealthy. And so part of the problem in church is, right, we get this get out of jail free card. Oh, we're all saved, so everything's good. Okay, but we got a bunch of angry, sexualized, lying, cheating, stealing, whatever people. Part of the gospel is, okay, I'm saved now. I need to walk in that. And so that's why Sandals is so different. I don't just want to get you saved. I actually want you to be changed. Mm-hmm. And I think that sets us apart. And know this, that the process of change is difficult. It's hard for all of us. But it's what God's called us to walk in. And the church is a very, very ugly place. Having said that, the church is the place to find healing. You can't say, Jesus, heal my life, and I don't want to be a part of your kingdom. And so to be a part of a kingdom is moving from the kingdom of me to we. So find a good, healthy church. And there's no perfect church. So there's hurtful, scary people in every organization, but find a church. And so here's the thing I would say about Sandals. When I look around our leadership and I look around at our people, there are good, healthy people. There's wholesome people that want to do good in your life. And we do a really good job of getting rid of dangerous people. We do. We identify them when they come on our radar. We go at it. We attack them like shepherds should to protect the sheep, and we move them on because there are wolves. The Apostle Paul says in Acts that wolves will come up from amongst yourself and devour the sheep, and the shepherd's job is to protect them. And so, my prayer is that Sandals would be a safe place. It's not a perfect place. There have been wolves here, and there will continue to be wolves here because wolves are drawn to sheep. And guess what Sandals is full of? 10,500 sheep. So where's the wolf going to go? So we all need to pay attention. We all need to be watching this. But the reality is, it's not just the church where abusers are. They're in police work. Think about this doctor. I mean, at the highest levels of professionalism in sports, this guy was able to thrive. And why? Because Michigan State, an amazing university, think about it, with PhDs and with brilliant people, right? Noble people that have given themselves to the education of young people, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. This guy should have been stopped in 1996. But he was allowed to continue because good people didn't rise up and challenge. And that's what we need to do. And so, psychologists abuse, teachers abuse. Anyone in a position of power, babysitters, that's a position of power. You're bigger, you're stronger, you're older. These are the people that are potentially dangerous. So that's why we need to align ourselves with people who are bigger and stronger, who are safe. And so, and that's what Christina in her healing, I'm not a perfect man. She's seen me be an idiot. You don't need to give an amen, but she's seen me, right? Like we've lived life together. She's seen moments where I've been rude and very un-Christ-like to my wife with some things, and Christina has lovingly
taken my side,
taken Tammy's side. But
the right side.
Christina's got to see that I do want to do the right thing, and I do want to help, and I do want to protect, and I do want to use my natural God-given strengths, which God has made me a powerful person. God's made me a strong leader. Those are my natural God-given and supernatural strengths, to use those for good, to love people and to protect people. To say no to myself so I can say yes to others, and just know there are good, healthy churches. And I don't want to be controversial, but they usually are growing. They're usually growing. Everybody hates big church. Healthy things grow. Right. Healthy things grow. Unhealthy things stay the same or shrink. And so, and again, I don't want to disparage any of our churches that are out that are struggling. I love you. I care for you. Healthy things grow. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that we don't have bad people that are drawn to us, but we run them off pretty quick.
Yeah. I would also just say, in regards to the issue of trusting others, one of the things that I'm sure, Tammy, you can speak to this too, but so often survivors don't know how to trust themselves. When abuse happens, boundaries get super skewed. And so before I could learn how to trust other people effectively, I had to start to put healthy boundaries in place in my own life, which is why I needed a community, because I can't see where the lines need to go. And then also just realizing that trust isn't always something that's just freely given. without it being earned. I mean, when I don't know somebody at all, I'm not going to just share my whole life with them. You know, I'm going to give you a little piece of something and then see how you handle that. And then I might give you a little bit more and see how you handle that. So I think just to also encourage the survivors out there that, first of all, learn how to trust yourself. If you're making difficult and bad decisions over and over again, there's probably an issue of you not being able to trust yourself, which is going to mean you're going to put yourself in situations of not being able to fully trust others. But boundaries are huge, and just sometimes start small. And then if somebody handles something well, give them a little bit more.
Yeah, great book by Cloud Townsend is Boundaries. I actually probably need to reread it. I've reread that, I think, every 5 years for 20 years. And so it's a great book. I don't know if Tammy wants to comment on this at all, but one of the things as I've walked with her is getting her to trust herself. And so here's the two different, not two differences, but a difference between Tammy and I over 20 years is I don't care what other people think, because if I believe something is good, right, and true, I do it. And for Tammy, it's been a struggle if people don't validate and say, yes, that's true. Yes, that's good, right, and true. And I think part of that stems from the abuse, is that when she was abused, people didn't come to her aid and say, yes, this is happening, and yes, this is right, and yes, this is true. And so I've had to constantly encourage her to trust what she knows to be good, right, and true, to trust what she knows to be right, and not be concerned with what everybody else says, because truth is truth, good is good, right is right, and to stand for that, and to and so that's sometimes, I think, hard for victims, especially of sexual abuse, is to be able to stand and say, this is good, right, and true. And even if it's not affirmed, this is good, right, and true.
Right. Can I speak to something really quick that it kind of goes back to Tyler's question and the other question, that seems that it's a really common thing. And so I just want to validate that for people who've experienced abuse is there's the abuser, but then there's also another term that that you'll go through, actually like referred to as a co-perpetrator. And that's not the person who abused you, but when other people who you held or are in a position that should protect you, should advocate for you, should be there for you, believe you, and respond for you, when they don't, they actually, studies show that pain actually can be more detrimental than the abuse itself. And so those people in our lives are considered co-perpetrators because they also did a wounding. And so when I hear them say, well, I can't touch the church, because they experienced people in the church that actually became co-perpetrators in their story, that I just want to validate that feeling of anger, because so many people that I talk to who've been abused, the majority of their anger actually isn't towards their abuser. It's towards other people in their life. I mean, there's anger there and fear there and all kinds of stuff, but that's just such a real, I just want to say that's such a real thing to have this anger that's elsewhere outside of, because that's a real term and a real experience of a co-perpetrator. Now, all of the other things about releasing and forgiving all applies there too, and releasing that anger of the people that didn't handle it right, because we have to come to a place where we, in our heart of hearts, we believe and we know that that anger is not good for us. As much as we want to have it, feel justified to have it, we have to care more about what's good for us at this point, and knowing that anger is not good for us. So, but I wanted to validate that place of, hey, but nobody did anything in the anger. That's actually a real phrase in healing, and that people will hear once they go to counseling, just called co-perpetrator.
Yeah, and I would just say, as Tammy's husband, man, by the grace of God, I wasn't sexually abused. Christina and we've talked about just the 80s. It was weird.
Yeah.
Like, it was just a weird time for those of you, like, oh, I'm going to go hang over at my friend's whose dad smokes crack. Okay, we'll be back by 9. Like, it was just a different time. No cell phones, no tracking. Like, it was just weird.
Just be home by dark.
Yeah, be home by dark. We don't care where you are. Like, I remember riding my bicycle like 30 miles away from my house. And my kids, my wife freaks out if they're down the street. Where are they? And so...
We're going to get to that later.
Yeah. So it was just a different time. But I know for me, it's been a growing process of learning how much the event has stunted her growth, her heart, her trust, like all of these things. And so I've had to learn, and Tammy's the person I love more than anybody in the world. I've had to learn and grow in this. And people who aren't abused just don't know.
That's the weird thing about being when you've experienced some kind of abuse. And I know Christina knows exactly what I'm going to say is, in some ways, I'm this 40-ish person, 40-plus-ish person.
40-ish. 40-ish.
Yeah, I'm going to be 44 soon. And I'm this 44-year-old person, and then there are parts of me that are still 5. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that I think is so common about when you're abused is like you grow up in so many ways, and you're growing up, but then there's parts of you, man, in a second, I'm right back in that place. Mm-hmm. Or my insecurities back in that place, or I go to fear back in that place. So that is one of the tricky, messy dynamics of being abused is that you grow up, but you kind of don't grow up in some ways.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to actually dive into that more, as a spouse of someone who's experienced sexual abuse. What are some things that maybe, Pastor Matt, you've learned to do or not do, or for you ladies, what have been things that have been helpful for your spouse or loved ones who, as they walk with you through when those feelings come back up or those times come back up, what's maybe helped you the most in those relationships?
Well, I've been married to my husband for 25 years. So I would say probably early in our marriage, the abuse stuff wasn't a big deal. Probably around year 4 or 5, it kicked in, and I didn't even know how to articulate what I needed. I actually just remember there were parts of my heart that I kept from him. Just even intimacy wise and things like that. I was afraid to tell him that there were things that I didn't like that bothered me. I mean, it was hard to communicate because I wasn't free. I still had so much connection to this thing that God has created in our marriage to be good and awesome is connected still to something very bad and dirty. And so, when you get married, a lot of that stuff just starts getting intermingled. So when I finally started to feel safe to just talk to Dan about my feelings, I just needed him to listen. I know initially he probably didn't know fully what to say. And I think that's got to be okay. Like for us as survivors, we need to have space to not expect so much from our loved ones. We need to give grace, like they're figuring it out, just like we're figuring it out. But just patience and a lot of space to be able to either talk about it. There were some times I just needed to not talk about it. Yeah. I wish I could say there was one way that I always responded, and it, unfortunately, it was kind of bipolar sometimes, and I didn't even know how I was going to respond. But just, I needed to know he wasn't going to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. I needed to know that regardless of how gross I felt, that he still saw me as beautiful, and he chose me, and he picked me. So just words of love and affirmation and, long suffering.
Amen.
Is a word I heard.
Yeah, you're going to hear a lot about that this next weekend.
I think that is just so true. Just for you to be willing to have the conversation or not when I didn't want to, and then to really be gentle as I even figured out what it meant for me. Because again, I was so young when it happened that I didn't have words for it or context for sexual things. And so then I grow up and I'm married and we're having sex and just figuring out or attaching what meanings I attached and that kind of stuff. And so working through those things, and the more, I think, loving that you've been in that, the more I'm able to have a stronger voice, because a lot of times I didn't want to have a voice. And so I don't know, I think you said it really well.
Yeah, I would just say, especially like if you're married to someone who has been sexually abused, that, sex is such a difficult thing, I think, to figure out anyways. The world isn't honest about sex in any way. And so, for a person who's been sexually victimized, their first encounter with sex was not good. It was not pleasant. It was not wanted. And so, God created sex, your first encounter to be loving and kind, and so for me, kind of the theme verse for me, and I keep going back to 1 Corinthians, but love is patient, love is kind, love does not demand its own way. And so being patient and kind, and so there are some things with a victim of sexual assault or rape or molestation. There are things that can occur sexually that trigger, and so you just need to be very, very aware of that and loving and kind and not demand that. And so, for me, I don't have any of those negative experiences attached to it. I just don't have that. For me, sex has been something that's been very, very positive, and I'm blessed in that sense. But I'm also blessed with Tammy, and I wouldn't exchange her for anybody in the world. And I remember at your wedding, somebody said, and people always say this, which is the dumbest thing. Stephanie and Tyler were, perfect for each other, and I almost choked on my drink that I was drinking because no, they're not. They're both a package deal, and together with Christ, they can find a way to make this a loving, great environment. Nobody's perfect for each other, and so Tammy's a package, and she's a package that I love, care for, and don't want any other package. And part of that package is sexual abuse, and so I need to love her through that, just like I'm a package deal. And part of mine is this gross, inflated idea of success. And, it's just like I'm an idiot in so many ways. And,
no, you're not.
Yeah. So I have my own issues, right? I'm a package deal, and she gets the package. She doesn't just get part of me. She gets all of me. And so it's understanding that. I think it's communicating, being open and being honest. And if you're married to somebody who's experienced, some kind of sexual sin against them, they're probably not completely honest with you yet about how some things make them feel. And just like you, at year 4 or 5, Tammy started to get more and more honest the longer we'd been married, and I needed to hear that. And I didn't handle it.
And part of that, I think, is just growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, you change, you feel more secure with who you are. You have different language, different context, different grounding. And so I think that's why it probably comes out a little bit later that you just don't have when you're younger.
Yeah.
And to have the opportunity to create intimacy in your marriage, emotional and spiritual intimacy is so important before the sexual intimacy. And so, if you're a victim of sexual abuse and you haven't talked to your spouse about it, I would just encourage you, let that be the first place, and let God do a work there. It's just there's something so powerful and transformative that happens when you trust the process and the person that you said yes to forever this side of heaven, to not invite them into one of the most important places of your past. There's just going to be a divide there. There's going to be a wedge there. So I would just say grace, patience, talk as you want and as you're able, and God will do a work in that place as you invite him in your marriage.
And I think along those same lines, if you're married to someone, like you said, Steph, that might be a good question that you ask who you're married to is, what can I know about you? What would you want me to know about you so that I can love you better? Because sometimes it's awkward to know, how do I bring this up? But when there's an invitation to bring it up, I think that can create a real safe place of I already know this, but what do you really want me to know about you so that I can love you well? I think that's one of the things you do really well, Matt.
Thank you.
And that's been really helpful for us. So.
Yeah, and I think the spouse's role is to speak truth. Like when Tyler, was abused, he wasn't strong enough to say no physically. He is now. He's a big dude. And for you to speak truth to him, you are a man. You are the protector of our family. You can keep us safe, and I trust you in this process. And to speak truth to his manhood and to speak truth to his strength, because those are real qualities for Tyler. And I think that's just so important for men who've been molested by men. One of the things that they call into question is their masculinity. And this is just a huge issue that nobody talks about in our culture. It's just not discussed in any way. And we need to speak to their strength, their manhood, and we need to affirm that. And the other thing is just to always be, for whatever the memory is. I mean, you just had one a week ago that we've never discussed in 22 years of marriage. Tammy came to me and said, I need to bring something to you. And even after 22 years of marriage, she was a little hesitant in telling me, hey, I just had this memory, which of course is right before the time she's going to get up on stage and talk about it. And I think you had some stuff that came up too. And right, that's the enemy working. And so I have to be in that moment, patient and kind and loving and make sure that she feels safe and heard.
And along those lines, I think something that's so good to think about is how, like a few minutes ago, I voiced how in most ways I'm this 44-year-old woman, and in some ways I'm still 5. And that's one thing Matt will speak to when I start having memories or thinking about things. He says, "You were 5, babe. Like, you were 5 years old. What would you say to a 5-year-old in that position?" And it helps put in perspective, and it helps me grow up in those places of what does a voice of a 5-year-old look like versus the voice of a 44-year-old. And so I think that's one of the good things that a spouse can say to the victim, is reminding them, speaking truth into perspective and giving perspective, because we sometimes don't have perspective, because like Christina said, like we didn't have boundaries. There's a lot of fuzzy gray lines. Not a lot of things are black and white. And so the spouse can often offer such good, truthful perspective.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we kind of want to shift now. We got a couple questions in just on the topic of reporting. What do we do once we know this information? And Tiffany wrote in a question and said, about 11 years ago, one of the teachers at my high school cornered me and threatened me before physically roughing me up. Overall, I was not harmed physically, and technically I'm not sure it would be considered molestation, although the way that he touched me in the event was extremely inappropriate. I didn't report it, and when I told my parents a few years later, their reaction made me think I was overreacting and maybe I should just let it go. I carry a great deal of shame and guilt because I later found out he had treated my sister in a similar way. So now where do I draw the line between letting things go and trying to ensure that this person doesn't hurt someone else again?
Yeah, I think it's always better to err on the side of reporting. That's just what we do at the church, is we just report. And, sometimes innocent people are accused. That's a reality. But, love rejoices when the truth wins out. And that's why, do the process, go through it. It's always better to do that. If this teacher's done something, and again, we've had situations where people at our church, have come forward and said, my teacher's doing this at school. We report it, immediately. And even school districts, I got to tell you, don't always handle it the best way. I've been really, really frustrated a couple of times, the way in which teachers have been dismissed. And part of the problem is they can't always prove it. And so they dismiss a teacher for a reason that's not related to sexual assault. Well, what that means is that teacher's going to get hired in another district, which really frustrates me. And again, Tammy and I were teachers. The vast majority of every profession are good, right, and true people. You just need to know that. There are evil people in every bunch, and they make their way in every profession. And so, if nothing less, this teacher has some anger management issues that needs to be dealt with, and they need to learn to handle teenagers, which are frustrating, in a much more healthy manner. And so I just would report it.
I think I can speak to that just from a real personal place of, I just recently actually reported my abuse to the authorities. And it's been so long that nothing can happen to that person. However, there is a record of it. We do know that he's a repeat offender. And so now if anything comes up, there's a full record of it. And so just in that regard, the part of reporting it validates what might be. So the concern, I think, was, what if he does this again to somebody else? Well, what you can do by reporting it is that if someone else does it, then it will immediately have some sustenance to it, because there will be a record of a past history. And so I think in that case, that is such a good thing that that there'll be some to say, like, hey, no, this isn't the first time we've heard of something like this. Maybe we do need to investigate this more or deeper. So I just think that.
Yeah, I agree. I loved this weekend how you talked, Matt, about it's not our job to be the detective. It's not our job to figure out even the end result, but to just trust the process, report. It sounds like for this person too, there's a little bit of minimizing going on. Like she or he isn't sure if it was abuse, if it wasn't. And that's a really common thing for abuse victims is we tend to minimize the severity. We wonder, maybe they hug everybody like that. Maybe they treat everybody, and so sometimes we need other people's eyes to say, that's not okay. That's not appropriate behavior. It's never okay for a teacher to rough someone up, so I just hope that that person feels empowered to make a phone call if they need to. And if it gets to a road where that teacher's no longer teaching or something, then that's great. But to just be able to feel like they've done their part, to tell their story, to hopefully protect someone else is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually got another question in now on the other side of reporting from a law enforcement officer. So his name is Travis, and he says, I agree that victims of all types are often forgotten. You also said that we are not detectives or investigators and need to focus on supporting victims. My question is, what about those of us who are detectives or investigators? In your opinion, how can professionals who are working with victims of abuse better seek truth and justice while supporting, loving, and keeping victims safe?
Yeah, well, first of all, if you're a detective and an investigator, you need to be a detective and investigator. So I was speaking to the congregation for those of us who aren't investigators and aren't detectives. If you are a detective and you are an investigator,
you're the place we're wanting that to actually happen because you're trained in that.
So what I would do for you is just because oftentimes, and a good friend of mine is a detective in the area of sexual abuse, and it's such a dark profession. You're dealing with the absolute just lowest scum of the earth people that do this to children. I mean, it's horrific. And so it's dark. So you need to constantly be exposing yourself to light and truth. And the reality is there is no justice in this life. There just isn't. What we do, what they're going to do to that doctor, you're going to lock him up and give him 3 meals a day for the rest of his life and isolate him in prison so that no other prisoners kill him. There's no justice in this life. Honestly, I feel like that guy should be hung by his ankles. I mean, literally, they used to do that, put a person in a cage and leave them out there till they rot. So everybody goes, don't do that, which is an effective, I think, warning, which a lot of people are, that's cruel and unusual, but effective. And I just feel like, Jesus calls out people that do terrible things to children, and he encourages drowning. So I feel like it's okay for me to encourage, real punishment. It's just there's no rehabilitation for that dude. Nasser, is that his name? What's the doctor's name?
I think so.
So I would say you need to have a prayer support group. One of the things I would encourage you to do if you're a detective is get in a community group where you're constantly having people that are praying for you. It's easy to get discouraged when bad guys get away, because it's not just about truth and justice. It's about what can you prove. And that's one of the challenges for law enforcement is a lot of times we know people are guilty, but we can't prove it. And that's a really, really difficult thing. And so and again, that's why reporting is so important, because you oftentimes provide the proof. And a lot of times you're one of many that this person has abused or has done this to. And that's why with multiple cases, we can get this person, at the very least, maybe not justice, but behind bars so that they can never do this to someone again and not further the hurt. So I would encourage you to have a small group that's praying for you. You really, really need to watch your own life because you are working in darkness. And so you have to make sure that darkness doesn't destroy you or your view of people. And a lot of police officers struggle with this. They just become jaded towards humanity. And I have to often remind cops, the reason you deal with people is they're doing bad things. Like the vast majority of human beings you're not encountering because they're not doing bad things. And a lot of cops have to deal with the same people over and over and over again because our state is broken and our prison system is broken. So it can get very, very frustrating and you can feel very, very ineffective. And so you have to pray, that people are reminding you that what you do matters, that what you do is important. And it's important to, at the very least, get these people behind bars so they can't hurt anybody anymore. And ultimately, that's our world's version of justice. So, be in church, be in the light as much as you can because you work in darkness. So you've got to, don't miss church. And that's what makes me so sad because police officer schedules are so difficult and you're in darkness and filth all week long. Man, run to the church, get here early, don't miss worship, don't miss a sermon, don't miss a debrief, get in community group, have people that are praying for you because what you do is so important. You keep us safe. I mean, I'm the shepherd of this church. Police officers are the shepherds of our cities and they patrol. And it's so important.
And I think I'd speak to the fact that I think it was about a year ago now, I actually went in to the police station, gave like a deposition, an account of everything that happened to me to a detective. And one of the things that made that so possible for me was that he really was a good heart handler. He really did know how to be patient as I answered, to ask questions gently, which he is a detective. We're talking to the people who actually are detectives. So I think you probably have some training in that already to do that well. But one thing that I love so much about the detective that I was with is that he remembered that I'm a person, and it wasn't just another, give me the facts, again, another case like this. And so that's what I would encourage for this person and those detectives out there, is to just remember that every single case is someone's actual life that you're dealing with. I'm sure that you're already very trained in how to get the information well, but just to not detach from that, the best that you can. And that made all the difference for me, I think, in reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 2 questions left here. And one of these is actually a video question that was sent in by someone named John. So we'll watch it here.
Being a father to 2 small children, I have found it difficult at times to honestly fully trust God for their safety. In your story of abuse and the way you've had to learn to trust other people, how has your parenting been affected by that? How have you learned to fully trust God and actually fully trust others when it comes to your kids?
Wow, great question.
So good.
You 2 want to go first?
Man,
You go ahead.
this is so loaded. I really appreciate that question, John. Well, I think I would say I've done some things that I wish I could do differently as a mother.
Amen.
Many, many things. I was afraid of everybody early on. I think there's nothing that kind of reawakens fear than when you have your first child. I remember when Danielle was born, being just terrified in general. I was just going to drop her. Or I had crazy ideas that she was just going to get hurt. And I literally remember having to physically pray and give her over to God and just say, God, I don't know how many days you are giving her to me on this earth, but I give every day back to you. And so there was something about fully like releasing it and praying that. I think there were times where I kept my kids too sheltered just because everybody was potentially bad. But I also think there's a lot of wisdom that I've learned from my abuse that I was able to apply to parenting. For example, things like, don't let your kids play with the doors closed with friends. That was just something that for me, because some of my experiences happened with other kids, relatively same age, sometimes older, and just sometimes we're with family friends or we're with neighborhood kids, and just let them go play, check in on an hour or something, but then the doors closed. So there were things that I learned about know who your neighbors are. My kids didn't just go over and play at anybody's house. That wasn't allowed. We would have kids come over to our home so that we could supervise. And then we talked to our kids early about just the dangers and being aware and being mindful of who you talk to and who you let into your heart, your life. Those, mistakes, but also I think there were a lot of good things that I learned as well.
I for sure have probably, with my girls, probably the most, with my firstborn Maddie, the most, have transferred my fear onto her for sure. She's afraid to, like me, she's afraid to do a lot of things. But then the flip side of that is, what I took from my abuse is I was very unaware and naive. And so, like you said, Christina, having conversations early on, I remember having conversations with my kids very, very early on about what it means to be your own best protector. Like Daddy and I will not always be with you. What does that look like? So if you're at a friend's house, and we were very careful about friends' houses. And Matt, you didn't experience abuse, but you, I think, have some memories where you witnessed some things that you were not okay with like older siblings. Yeah. And so Matt had a pretty hard, fast line about like our girls weren't allowed to spend the night with people who had an older brother, and things like that. But for me, just the conversation of what does it mean to be your own best protector? Nobody should ever be able to tell you that you can't tell anything to Daddy and I. That's a red flag for you. Because My abuser was a very, very close family friend, which is most often the case, not always, but we used real specifics, like even Uncle so-and-so doesn't, ask you to do things or see you change. Or so I really wanted to equip them with how do they be their own best protector, and having those conversations early. One thing that's a real practical thing that I think it's probably a good place to say is just use real language with your kids. Like I had been made aware of a case that happened where some pretty serious abuse happened. And the abuser actually didn't get punished because the language was so wonky, like down on my downtown or so, and so we always said, this is your vagina. This is your,
your penis. You could say penis, anus, vagina.
Use the real language with them. There's nothing for them to be ashamed about, the real terminology of their body, to be able to give an account for that. So those are some good things. And that conversation has actually served us well as the kids have gotten older, because what that looks like changes. We've actually gotten to have a conversation with our son now about what does it look like to be your own best protector. It looked different when you were 4 than when you're 15. When you're 15, that might even be from you. Like, you need to be your own best protector now of things you might want to look at on the internet, but you shouldn't, because you are your own best protector. And so, we just had a conversation with him about, like, right now we're policing you, we're there for you, we're whatever. That won't always be the case. And so you have to know and be equipped to make good choices for yourself. I tell my girls little things that, again, they're motivated by fear to a degree, but I also think it's setting them up for success. Like I have 2 young adult daughters, a 21 and an almost 20-year-old, and you don't need to be getting gas at midnight at night, Be mindful of where you are on the gas gauge at night. Matt and I were in small group with a friend who needed to get some car work done late at night and had something really tragic. She was raped in small group. And so
in small group.
She shared in small group of her rape at my daughter's age from that kind of a thing. And so I want them to not be naive. I felt very naive. And so what was meant for bad, I think, and motivated from somewhat of an unhealthy fear, I think I try to be mindful of that, but give them good tools to have a voice. No one ever tells you to stay quiet. There's nothing ever to keep from us. And then to be mindful. And that best protector place transitions to, that's going to be you at some point in the choices you make. You have to be your own best protector, even from yourself.
Yeah, I think it's so important, especially, I just resonate with the dad. It's so scary to have kids. I was not nearly as scared as Tammy was. When Madison was born, I was so excited. I bought a big banner. It's a girl. It was all pink with balloons. And she made me take it down.
I don't want people to know.
She don't want people to know we have a kid because she's going to be abused. And that was like the welcome to Tammy's past. Yeah, I was just, I literally was like, I want to tell the world that we've had a child. And she's like, no, because the molesters will know. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, so, it's so weird to think about that.
Yeah, so, right, but we come from different experiences. So I would just say, as a parent, be very mindful of older children. For me, I was never abused, but whenever I went over to someone's home, like my first pornographic movie I watched was my friend's older brother. Like, I'm literally like 11 years old, sitting down, I remember with a big gulp, drinking it, and I'm watching sex. I'm like, what the heck is this? I thought we were watching a movie, which we were watching. It was just not any kind of movie I'd ever seen. Talk to your kids about, you shouldn't look at these images. You shouldn't see people naked. God has made that for marriage. Talk about, and don't make it dirty. That God wants you to, save this for your spouse. I talk to my son about it all the time. If you view pornography, you're training yourself to not be monogamous. You're training yourself to not be pleased by the nakedness of your wife. So train yourself, prepare yourself to be focused on your wife and to love her. The Bible actually says, always remember your wife's breasts from her youth. I mean, that's in the Bible,
that was
right?
A tongue twister.
Yeah, sorry. So just know that. And again, I would tell my girls this: no one touches your vagina unless there's a problem, because girls can have problems. And then it should be mommy should be present. If you're in the doctor, mommy or daddy should be present. Like, we're there with you, and the doctor can touch you for a period of time for a specific purpose while we're there. So not your coach, no one else. And so you use the word penis, vagina, anus. You use these words. These things, no one should ever make you feel any. No one should touch you in these areas. This is not appropriate. You should not touch people in these areas, because sometimes abuse can be, hey, touch me. And so you've got to tell them this. And again, here's the biggest thing that I would teach your kids. There's no such thing as a secret. We have no secrets. We tell everything that happens. And so, I mean, that'd be so good. You know, you remind your kids, do we keep secrets in this house? No, we talk about everything that happens. You know, what happened? We don't keep secrets. And that's just so important, because like your abuser said, don't tell. And sin lives in secrecy. God lives, you know, in the truth. And so we need to do that. But, you know, I just want you to know, to the father, you know, there is healing that is helpful. You know, so here's Christina. She's, you know, been abused. She has, you know, her kids, probably a little paranoid at first, but your daughter lived with us this last year. So, right, you know, you're able. And as far as we know, Danielle had a good experience.
She did.
Right?
That's great.
So it is possible. And so here's the other side, right? My girls have had great experiences with men, which is I'm like, not every guy is this way. I'm like, I mean, you know, because our daughters have been surrounded by good, loving men. So now our problem is they think every guy's great and loving. And I'm like, no, that's why you don't go to the gas station at 2 a.m., you know? You've got to use wisdom. So our kids have actually been, you know, blessed in that there's been great community, but it's a curse in that there's naivete, because they've been around men who have been good, you know, fathers. You know, like I've spoken this to, you know, Christina's oldest. I say, I'm your second dad. Listen to me. You know, and usually there's tears involved in these speeches.
And I think she mouthed off to you a little bit this weekend, kind of like she would her dad.
Yeah.
Second dad.
Yeah, she's great. So, you know, but we've you know, we've grown up together. We've been in each other's lives, and I think that's so important. Healthy, safe community is important. You know, but you know, so I don't know. Being a parent I think it's the most like God you will ever be. You will be terrified, because it is scary. It is these you know. These babies are so precious and so beautiful and deserve such a great shot at life, and the rest of the world oftentimes is trying to ruin that, and it's hurtful. And so just be so honest. Watch playtime together with kids. Talk to your kids about we don't play doctor.
Yes.
We don't play, you know, we don't make Barbie dolls get on top of each other. You know, watch for those things. You know, what is Han Solo doing to Princess Leia? You know, okay, let's talk about that and use that as an opportunity. And so Tammy and I always used penis, anus, and vagina, and we talked about sex all the time. Whenever our kids asked about sex, we would talk about it. And
we heard some advice early on in our marriage about parenting in this way, as always go a little bit farther than they're asking. And we just decided from an early time that we wanted to make sure that our kids saw us as the experts in their life, and which was hard. I mean, they in their naivety would ask us some questions that embarrassed us, and in the moments like game face, like, well, here's what that is, and they leave, and we're just like, oh my gosh, can you believe we just had that? But you know, we kind of melt down. But to them, and after time, as they got older, they've asked us just about everything at this point, and we're so glad for that, because we know we have a voice into their life that they trust. And so don't be afraid to have embarrassing conversations with them. They need you to keep them.
Yeah, and just as
aligned.
parents know that it's really easy to say, I'm going to talk to my kids. Like for Stephanie, it's really easy to sit here and say, I'm going to talk to, what's your daughter's name going to be?
We don't know yet.
It's really hard to talk to. We don't know yet. It's really easy to talk to. We don't know yet, because she's not here. When she's actually 13, 14, has her first period, you know, and now girls are having that much sooner. It's, man, you're like, whoa, this is real. Like, you know, talk to your boys about masturbation. Talk to your girls about pornography. Talk about all of these things, and you know, because again, it's so hard. And, you know, I would say when I was younger, I was more critical of my parents. As I've gotten older, I've had more grace, because I realize how hard it is to love someone so much, which is why God is so loving. Here's the thing that's amazing about God, our Father, is he tells us exactly the way it is. Like he doesn't he doesn't fudge at all, man. He's like, boom, you do like, right? A man who commits adultery is a fool in everything that he does. It's like he doesn't hold back. Whereas parents were like, well, sweetie, there's the birds and there's the bees and, and God just like, boom, don't do this, and because he loves us so much, he tells us the truth. And, I
would say this too. I'm sorry, Christina, I'm talking so much right now, but don't assume that they're going to understand it. There's been times where we've started conversations or something's come up with our kids when they were younger, and they would go, oh, I heard about that at school. And we would say, what exactly did you hear? What exactly do you feel like that means? Like, okay, you got it. So that we could make sure that the information they had was actually spot on and accurate. And so I just recently heard another pastor's wife share her abuse story and talked about how her parents literally gave her the old golden book of the birds and the bees. And she said, and somehow from that, I was supposed to discern that this was about sex and bodies and how that worked. And so don't assume that your kids are getting or have the right information. Have them repeat back to you what they're hearing or what they understand or what you're trying to communicate. So if we're saying, nobody sees you, okay, what am I saying? And have them say it back to you so that you know that they understand it. Because what we want our kids to be is informed, to have good boundaries. I mean, this is a way from such an early age to help our kids have healthy, good boundaries, which I didn't have, Christina didn't have. Right. And so I just think, when you know better, you do better. And we know better. And so we're trying to do better. And it doesn't mean, I don't know, it's hard, but it's so worth it.
Yeah. Well, I remember, I think what was really helpful is I remember very clearly when my mom explained like where babies came from to me, but it was at an age where none of that really weirded me out. It was just like, okay, that's interesting that happens with people. But I'm sure for her, it was super awkward, super uncomfortable because she gets all the things that carries. But what was so great is I was at an age that was young enough to where I didn't have a bunch of baggage attached to that. There wasn't a bunch of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my mom is talking to me about this thing. It was just normal. And so I think for parents to be encouraged, when you talk to your kids really early and really young, they don't have all the things attached to that you do. And you get a chance to kind of build that from there. So I've always been really thankful. I need to ask my mom at some point how old I was so I can like try to get in that window with our kids. But it was really great because I didn't care or know or have any context for what that meant. I just went, cool, that's where babies come from. That's kind of weird. Moving on, let's like go see Beauty and the Beast or whatever was happening. But I was thankful for that because once I heard about it at school, I was like, oh yeah, that's not a big deal. My mom already explained what that was to me.
Yeah, they need to hear it from you. And the other thing as a parent is you need to explain is not just sex, the mechanics. You have to explain what it means for us as Christians. And this is huge in raising your children because you can explain the mechanics and then they're going to get their meaning from school. So you have to explain the mechanics and the meaning and say, this is what it means to us as Christians. Sex for us glorifies God because it's the only way as Christians we are like God in that we create life. Like it's one of the main ways that we are in God's image. God creates life. It's the way that we can create life. So for us as Christians, sex is an act of worship in honor to him, or it's an act of sin when done in a way that he says we shouldn't do it. And so explain to your kids that it's just something that we do as Christians, and we just need to really, really protect that. We're not here to judge what everybody else thinks or how everybody else does it. As Christians, our bodies are God's, and we honor God with our body, specifically in the way in which we have sex. And, God is very, very specific about how he wants us to participate in sex as Christians. And they need to hear that from you so that when they hear from the teacher, you can do whatever you want or they pass out condoms or whatever they do, they understand, okay, God has something specifically planned for me.
Well, and everything that our kids are hearing right now is that it's fine to be casual about it, that it doesn't mean that much. And so that's a conversation to continue to re-engage in because the world is telling our kids, sex is casual, be casual about it, get physical, what's a little this or a little that.
Casual sex is not Christian.
And...
Nice.
Ring his own bell.
Nice.
I have to. Stephanie's lagging.
I was trying to just let the, episode
but that's why it's so important. Dan and Christina are so good about engaging in their parents and as parents with their kids in those conversations, which has been a good model for us too, to just have the hard conversation, be in there and continually circle back. That's so key is continually circle back because they're going to leave the conversation with you feeling like I got it and then go out and hear everything to the contrary. So you circle back. You continue to circle back.
Love it.
Yeah. And I know Justin has been doing a lot of research on this topic because he has young kids. So we will actually have a bunch of great books that he's found to kind of even help start those conversations with your kids. We'll throw links to those in the show notes. We would love to have you guys check those out and have some resources to start with once you actually get into game time and are ready to have that talk with your kids. We want to make sure you have a lot of resources to help with that. So we're really going to wrap up the episode now with one last question. I would say both for those who have been victims of abuse and those who are likely going to receive people's stories now as more people are trying to get brave. And I'm sure there are lots of people who listen to the debrief who are those safe people who people are going to want to come to. So I imagine that, after this weekend and after listening to this episode, a lot of feelings come up. Both of you have mentioned like, oh yeah, I've had new memories come up as this has happened. I know talking with Tyler in the week leading up to that was a rough week for him because he's like, I'm remembering all of these things. I'm feeling this anger again because I know what's coming this weekend. What do you do, even now that you've been years into your journey of healing? How do you handle when those feelings come back up again? Or even Pastor Matt, how do you handle when people come to you with those stories of those feelings? What does that look like now once those things get kind of re-triggered again for you?
For me, at this point, the time that a memory will take me down is much shorter than, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I remember I would have a flashback and I would be just useless. It felt like for a couple of days, just so discouraged. Now it's maybe a couple hours or, 20 minutes and I have to kind of regroup. Even Sunday night coming off the weekend, Dan was asking me, how are you feeling after the weekend? And it was so great. I felt so thankful and honored to be able to share what God has done. But it was vulnerable, and it takes a toll. And so I just felt super kind of emotionally tired and really didn't want to see anybody for a while. And so I think you got to just acknowledge that that's okay. Like just because I might cry because I have a memory doesn't mean I'm not still healed. I just think the enemy loves to rob us of what God has already done. And so when a memory comes up or when something triggers, we need to acknowledge it, just like we talked about in the sermon this weekend. Acknowledge the problem, acknowledge the memory, acknowledge what we're feeling, speak truth to that. I need to remind myself, remember, I've already forgiven, or God, is there something else that's still unforgiven? Or is there still some other healing you want to do? Because I think that's the thing I've found in my own life is like, it's not like, okay, now I'm done. It's still a work. So like just asking the Lord, God, what are you trying to show me in this? And so give grace to yourself, give grace to people around you, and just know it's a process. Healing from sexual trauma is a process. And it can take a while. So I've also walked with women who they've shared their story, and yes, it's empowering, but sometimes right after you tell your story, you also feel really, really exposed and really vulnerable. So I would just say to people who are maybe starting to come out and talk about this, if you feel kind of funky afterwards or the night, know that that's normal, that's okay. And that's part of the process. It doesn't mean you're taking steps backward. It means that you're just excavating what's been hidden for so long and it's getting exposure.
Yeah, I would add to that as something comes up for someone who's experienced abuse, the older you are and in the different place that you might be, like Matt said, what is the meaning attached? And so I'm able to identify now meanings I attached that I wasn't when I was younger. And so that's actually been quite freeing for me as I heal more and more is, I attached this meaning. 44-year-old me goes, that's ridiculous and not true. Whereas even 34-year-old me couldn't do that. And so I think that God, just time and maturity and God's grace all work so much together. I just had to have a conversation recently with someone who's had some pretty extreme abuse and I was really struggling with, but I don't feel better yet. But I'm doing all of the things that I'm being told to do to heal, and I still have this inner tornado going on inside me. And I said, I still have a little tornado, but it's so much less. This side of heaven, there might always be a little bit tornado going on. Like there's chances that this side, there's always going to be a little residual, and that's okay because, and I had to say, how do you feel about your actual life now? Do you feel loved? Do you feel safe? Do you feel secure? Do you feel whole? Do you feel God's love? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, then that's what I want you to cling to. You don't need to be stuck in, but all this happened to me, to that degree. And that's what I would say to the Me Too movement is I could say #Me Too. However, I don't want, and I decided early on, I don't want to be a person that just identifies as someone being abused, but I want to be whole and healed and the most emotionally healthy me I can be. And so I think there's kind of a different #movement out there, if you will, from Me Too to being set free. And that's what we want for people here. We don't want people to just identify that they've been abused. We want them to find freedom in that. And it is possible. Kay Warren says this in her book when she talks about trauma, to think about it as if you're a train car and one side of you is on one track and the other side is on the other, and it's the abuse and the heartache and the damage and the brokenness. And then equally linked on the other side is the joy and the goodness and the healing and the freedom of life. And that is kind of life moving down that track parallel. And that's sort of the way it goes. And so even though you're going to have some brokenness and you're going to be figuring out how it's coming out relationally, because Christina and I are big believers that you might not think it affected you, but people around you are probably experiencing how it affected you. I had a really unhealthy, needy place in me to be picked by people in my life, because that meant I meant something, which was exhausting to the people around me because they couldn't pick me 24/7 all the time. And so figure that part out. But also don't just sink such an identity into I was abused, me too. Spend time thinking about the joy and the goodness that God also has in your life, because life is going to be that parallel track of there's going to be a lot of sorrow, but a lot of joy at the same time. And that one won't exist without the other. And typically we want all the good. Let's move over to one side, but that's not life.
Yeah. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for being so open, so vulnerable with your own stories and your lives with us. We will have a lot of resources in the show notes for this episode. So if you haven't yet had a chance to check out our website at www.debrief.show, make sure to do that. The specific episode will be at debrief.show/97. We'll have links to those books that we talked about. We'll have links to, again, connect with our soul care team, or you can just do that at move.sc/help. You can also call our church office anytime. We would love to connect with you. However you reach out to us, we would love to get you some help and help you start taking those steps forward in healing. You can also follow us at Debrief Show on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. That's a great way to share resources from this episode with your friends. Maybe they aren't ready for a full, hour and a half, 2 hour episode.
Sorry, guys.
But there might be a great quote from this that can start a conversation or something. We would love to have you follow us there so you can share what we've been doing out there. And lastly, if you'd like to support Sandals Church and what we're doing here on the Debrief, you can text Give Debrief to 951-900-4120 to give to the show at any time. We would love to have that so that we can continue doing what we are doing here on the show. But thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to take off now.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.